It was a small, charming village. Nestled on the southern slope of a hill, it consisted of 30 houses built in a similar style and about 100 quiet, obedient inhabitants. A typical, peaceful central Anatolian village. This was the teacher's first assignment. Although the villagers and children had seen a few teachers before, for this teacher, it was a place to take the first steps in life, earn a first salary, and stand independently. The village headman had welcomed the teacher in the district, squeezed them onto the crowded village minibus, and brought them to the village. After serving dinner, he laid out a floor mattress in a small storage room that doubled as a guest room, not giving the teacher a chance to see or get acquainted with the surroundings due to the dark. The teacher found the setting unfamiliar, and affected by the excitement, had difficulty sleeping, tossing and turning for quite a while. At dawn, they woke up to the sounds of roosters crowing and cows mooing, looking around in surprise to grasp where they were. Soon, the headman arrived and informed the teacher that breakfast was ready. After washing up, the teacher, though slightly hesitant, ate the breakfast of organic products, including village eggs, with great appetite. Following breakfast, they toured the village with the headman and went to see the school where the teacher would work and the lodging where they would stay. They met the villagers, sunning themselves under the eaves, and walked toward the school located a short distance from the village. The school was a small concrete building with a single classroom within a large yard. The bathroom was outside, tucked in a corner of the yard. The lodging was a small building with 2 rooms and a kitchen, and luckily its bathroom was indoors. For now, that was the one good thing. Otherwise, they would never want to go outside to the toilet in the middle of the night, especially in the dark. Besides, September, when schools opened, brought rather cool weather. In this high-altitude village, jackets and sweaters had already become commonplace. The teacher placed the belongings they had brought from the district haphazardly in the kitchen. The headman said to let him know if anything was needed, and then left. The lodging was furnished with a bed, a table, a chair, and a rug. Enough for a single teacher, at least for now. After doing a bit of cleaning, the teacher cooked a nice menemen with the eggs the headman had sent. They brewed some tea and sat at the table by the window, enjoying their meal with appetite. While eating, the teacher observed the village and gazed at the school where they would teach the children. They liked the village. It was quiet, a place that kept to itself. In truth, the teacher didn't particularly enjoy silence. They were a young man in their 20s, just starting to grow a mustache, still quite inexperienced. Aside from university, this was their first time leaving home. The stark contrast between the bustling student life at university and the extreme quiet here gave them an eerie feeling. Oh well, at least I'll have some peace of mind, they thought, finding a small consolation. The short day passed quickly and the melancholy of evening began to set in. The village didn't yet have electricity. Life revolved around gas lamps. The teacher lit their gas lamp and turned on their small battery-operated radio, finding a lively tune. They opened the book they had just started reading, found their place, and continued from where they had left off. After a while, fatigue began to set in, bringing on drowsiness. After attending to their needs, they lay down in bed, dimming the lamp slightly without fully extinguishing it. A soft, dim light filled the room. After lying there for a while, they drifted off to sleep. They didn't know how long they had been asleep when they woke up suddenly. Everything was pitch dark. The gas in the lamp had run out, and a suffocating darkness had enveloped the room. Looking out the window, they noticed that the entire village was similarly swallowed by the darkness, with not a single light to be seen. But when they turned their gaze toward the school, fear and astonishment hit them at the same time. A light was seeping out from inside the school. In the pitch darkness, it was the only source of light. By the beam of their flashlight, they checked their watch. It was 3:27 a.m. Who could possibly be at the school at this hour? Should they go and check, or wait until morning? But the school was now their responsibility. If something went missing or a fire broke out, they would be blamed. They grabbed the flashlight, put on some clothes, and stepped outside. The air was icy cold, almost like frost. Walking on their tiptoes, they headed toward the school, sweeping the flashlight back and forth to see if anyone was around, but there was nothing. Just thick, impenetrable darkness. First, they checked the school's front door. It was locked, secured further with a padlock. They walked around to the back and tried peeking through the window. Bending low, they lifted their head toward the glass, standing just tall enough to see inside. The room was empty. On the teacher's desk, however, an old-fashioned oil lamp was burning. They checked the other two windows as well, pushing on them to see if they were broken or open. They weren't. No one had entered through the windows. So how was that lamp burning inside? And if someone was in there, how had they gotten in? As they looked around nervously, a shadow appeared inside the room. They immediately crouched down where they were. The light streaming out from the window spilled onto the ground, illuminating the darkness outside. In the beam of light on the ground, a dark shape began to form. Whoever was inside was moving closer to the window where the teacher stood. The teacher pressed themselves tightly to the ground, afraid of being seen. The shadow grew larger and began blocking more of the light, indicating that whoever it was, they were approaching the window. Finally, the shadow reached the window, covering the light completely, as if peering out into the night. The teacher's fear was overwhelming. Trembling, they shut their eyes, terrified of encountering something they didn't want to see. They waited at the base of the window for half a minute, eyes closed. Slowly, they began to open them. Shaking uncontrollably from fear, their teeth chattered from the cold, but they clenched them to avoid making noise. Half opening their eyes, they glanced at the patch of light on the ground. The light had fully returned. This meant that whatever had been inside had moved away from the window. They stayed crouched like that for a while longer. Did they see me? What if whoever it is has a gun or a knife and is waiting to kill me, or is about to come outside? A flood of pessimistic thoughts ran through their mind in mere seconds. Resigned to their fate, they decided to wait a bit longer. Yet they couldn't suppress their curiosity. Summoning all their courage, they slowly raised themselves toward the window again. Peering through the glass at eye level, they tried to see inside. The lamp inside was still burning in its place, its flame smoky. There was no one to be seen. Rising a little higher, they attempted to see the entire room. At the same time, they strained their ears to catch any sound, fearing that whatever or whoever was inside might come from behind and do harm. Gaining a bit more confidence, they stood up fully and scanned the room through the window. The faint light from the lamp revealed as much as it could. On the teacher's desk, a white cloth caught their attention. It was dirty, torn in places, and faintly swayed in the subtle flickers of the lamp's light. Pressing their hand against the glass and opening their eyes wide, they tried to discern anything clearly. There was nothing else unusual. As they stared again at the dim light of the lamp, something suddenly rose from the floor just inside the window, standing directly before them. At that moment, they found themselves face to face with a pair of enormous jet-black eyes. They froze. No sound came out. They couldn't move or even seem to breathe. The only part of them still active was their wildly beating heart, which felt as though it might stop if it continued at that pace. Expecting a horrifying sight, they were instead confronted by a radiant, elderly face. Although to call them fully elderly might not be accurate. Their long beard had begun to grey in places, and their hair, also long with streaks of white, cascaded down their neck. They had a large, imposing appearance and stood with an air of vitality. The clothes they wore vaguely resembled a military uniform, but they were so torn and tattered that they seemed ready to fall apart. For a while, the teacher stood outside while the stranger remained inside, their gazes locked through the glass, eyes meeting in an uncanny silence. Faced with the captivating gaze, the teacher could no longer hold on and fainted. When they woke up, dawn was breaking. They quickly collected themselves and nervously glanced back inside. There was no one there, no light, no figure. Everything was exactly as it had been when they had left the school earlier. They ran to the school door and saw that the lock was still securely in place. Using their keys, they unlocked it and cautiously stepped inside, scanning the surroundings. Their heart was racing just as wildly as it had the night before. Entering the classroom, they found nothing unusual. It was as if everything they had seen had been a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Maybe it was just a trick my mind played on me, they thought. I must have had a terrifying dream and ended up here. But they had no history of sleepwalking or any similar condition. Still, there was no trace of the incredible vision they had witnessed during the night. How could this be? The teacher sank into a chair and began to think. They couldn't make sense of it. Getting up again, they decided to head back to their quarters. A hearty breakfast might help them think more clearly about what they had seen, or thought they had seen. They put some tea on the stove, took out a few slices of cheese, and placed the village bread the headman had given them on the stove to warm it up. The stove was nearly out, though, and needed to be rekindled. They brought in a few pieces of kindling and looked around for paper to light it. The only paper they had was the book they had been reading. Realizing they should check the coal shed, they opened it and waited for their eyes to adjust to the darkness. After a moment, they spotted sacks and piles of papers left there to be burned. Thinking they might need more later, they hoisted one of the sacks onto their shoulder and carried it back to the quarters. They brewed their tea and set it to steep, tearing up some of the papers from the sack to feed the stove. As the stove roared to life, warming the room, they felt their spirits lift. Lying on their back on the bed, they rested for a while. They were almost asleep when they remembered that it was nearly time for school to start. The students would begin arriving soon. Sitting up on the bed, they began pulling the documents and papers from the sack, trying to understand what they were. It was likely that these were documents left behind by the previous teachers, now outdated and no longer relevant. His colleagues had gathered class notes and old records. Reaching toward the bottom of the sack, he pulled out a torn red folder. There was nothing written on the cover. Opening it, he began flipping through its contents. The folder contained photographs and details about the village and school from the early years of its establishment. The pictures were faded and old, and the writing on some pages had partially disappeared. When he reached the last page, he froze in shock. In one of the photographs, a figure bore an uncanny resemblance to the being he thought he had seen the night before. In fact, upon closer inspection, he was certain it was the same person. He could never forget those piercing black eyes. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Startled, he stood up and opened it. The headman stood there, holding a loaf of warm bread. He invited the headman inside and offered him a seat on the bed. The folder was still in his hand. Without hesitation, he showed the photograph to the headman and asked, "Who is this?" The headman replied, "He was a poor soul from our village. He went off to fight in the Korean War, but never returned. We received no news about him for a long time. Later we found out that he had been martyred in Korea and buried there.